Hello, students. This week we're going to talk about our heritage. It can be our family heritage or our country heritage, the heritage we come from, which involves emigration and immigration to different countries. I know many of you, even if you're not from the United States, it involves heritage migrating from one country to another. And so it's been a very interesting semester. And I see many of you are from immigrant families, and some of you actually are migrants. So it's a beautiful pattern like this quilt, the different connections that we make with families and in our lives with one another and spiritually as well. And once we tie those in, once we sew them together, we can see the Lord's hand in our life forming a pattern for us to follow, to learn from the mistakes of others, and to carry on in the future. You will also learn about family search partner sites, so I hope you will make use of those. You can join for free. Some make you pay fees for some of the records, but some don't. And they're very useful in finding records you might not find on Family Search. So I decided to share some connections that I've made with family, and I hope that you will learn from them as well. This first one concerns the Müllers, which is this German name Miller. Um, and this is from my husband's family. My last name is Miller because my husband is a Miller. And the Müllers were actually millers. They had a windmill in Poznan, Poland, in that section of Poland where they ground grain for the Jews. They were Prussians, which are people of German descent that lived in Eastern Europe and Russia at that time, who were no longer there because of the world wars. Most of them left and immigrated, and so did my husband's grandfather's family. This little boy right here in the picture is Reinhold, and this is about the time I think they left and went to the United States. This is Reinhold as a man in his 90s. He sort of reminds me of Yoda from Star Wars. I'm pretty tall, and he was this tiny little man that spoke 5 different languages because of the area of the world he lived in. And I was able to meet him and marry my husband before he died. And this is a picture of his house in Las Vegas. The pictures on the wall. You can see that's probably him as a little boy as well. My husband received the heritage of the big ears from his grandfather. His family immigrated to the Chicago area, and it was during the time of Prohibition, which was a time in the United States where liquor or alcohol was illegal to purchase, to sell, to make, and people went underground. They did it illegally. Well, so did Reinhold's mother, who was actually his stepmother because his mother died when he was a little toddler. And his father married his aunt, and she made gin in her bathtub to sell there in Chicago. but the word has it that her husband, Papa, drank most of it. That might have been one of the reasons why Reinhold, in his early teens, hopped on trains and traveled around. And he was called a hobo, basically a homeless person that rode the rails, rode the trains. Well, he got caught for sneaking onto a train in Las Vegas and got kicked off. And the story goes from there. He was later converted to the church in southern Utah and returned and raised his family of 10 children in Las Vegas. And he was pretty poor during his life. Like I say, there's the heritage he left my husband, the big ears, which I constantly tease my husband about. So my husband, the reason why he's a Vegas native, which he's very proud of, or a desert rat as he called himself, is that his grandfather got kicked off the train in Las Vegas, which was just a railroad stop in those days. There were no casinos, no dam, no nothing here. My daughter loves to use her heritage in her third grade classroom. There she explains how the ER on the Miller means it's a thing or a noun. This is the verb to mill, and you make it a noun in English by the ER, and it was the same in German. She shares information about people that immigrated to the United States, and many of her students are immigrants as well. And so she has some wonderful stories to tell that the students really enjoy. So she loves sharing her heritage with her students. Now comes a story of a connection I made with two great great grandfathers from different sides. This is my great great grandfather, Horn, from my father's side, and my great great grandfather, Driggs, from my mother's side. And they were both converts to the church. Shadrach Ford Driggs was converted to the church in Ohio, and Joseph Horn, who was a immigrant to Canada from England, um, was newly married when Parley P. Pratt came to Canada, and Orson Pratt, and they converted him to the gospel. And well, the Spirit converted him to the gospel. And so they were both LDS pioneers too and came to Utah. Well, when my husband retired from the U.S. Navy, we were living in Virginia in the United States on the East Coast and had to travel back to the West, where both of us were from, to start a new life there. And we decided to stop in Nauvoo. I don't think my little children remember it, but we do. And that was before the temple was rebuilt in Nauvoo, and there was still not too much standing. We discovered at the visitor center that you could discover where your ancestors, if they had lived in Nauvoo, had land, because it had been kept and plotted out. They kept where they had homes. And since there was no family search at that time and no cell phones, I racked my brain for family history stories and came up with the names of these two great great grandfathers. And so we discovered they owned land there in Nauvoo along Mulholland Street, which was the street the temple is on and was on. And lo and behold, when we got to the address, I discovered that my great great grandfather's house was still standing. A lot of the houses were destroyed. Um, Actually, when the Nauvoo temple was ultimately destroyed by a tornado, a lot of people took the temple blocks and built homes with them. So you'll see temple blocks in some of the homes that people that took over Nauvoo built houses and buildings with. But much to my surprise is I discovered that my father's great grandfather and my mother's great grandfather were neighbors. And I thought, wow, they must have known each other. I speculated they had to know each other because they lived across the street from each other. In fact, my mother's great grandfather had his wagon shop across Kitty Corner, which is diagonally um, from Joseph Horn's house. And I thought, there's no way they didn't know each other. So I called my mother and told her about my discovery. And then she told me a story about a connection her brother Paul, my Uncle Paul, made that confirmed this story. He was a bishop in Logan at one point, and he was counseling a girl that was a descendant from my father's family, a Horn. And the Spirit whispered to him at that time that the Horn family and the Drix family were friends. And so that confirmed to my mother as well that they had known each other because when they immigrated to Utah, they migrated to Utah, they settled in different places. One settled in Pleasant Grove and one settled in Salt Lake. So it was an amazing connection that I was privileged to make and know about. And I have often said since then, because my parents married when they were really old, um, I shouldn't say really old, but they were in the 30s and 40s, that their great grandparents got them together. Later discovered as a connection as well that one time this great great grandfather Horn went on a farming expedition to St. George area, and in his journals he mentions my husband's great great grandfather Dudley Levitt, and they had met each other. So I think sometimes, because I married a little bit later too, I say those ancestors got us together. So it was really fun to maybe speculate or have those connections where we learn, thought that maybe the Lord uh, knows more than we know. The last connection I want to share with you, I know this is going a little long, is my great great grandfather Price. His ancestors immigrated in, I think, the 1600s to the Americas, and they were from Holland. Their name was Price, spelled differently, but now is Price, and they settled in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was a state where all religious faiths were welcome, and there are many different people of different faiths in Pennsylvania. He was actually born in the District of Columbia, but he was orphaned at the age of 3, and his mother left him into the keeping of Quakers. And Quakers was a religious sect in the United States as well. And they taught him to be a master carpenter. They taught him the skills for carpentry. So the story goes, we don't know who converted him, or we don't know his conversion story, but he was converted in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And when my daughter, that's pictured in this picture with other missionaries in Philadelphia, went to the Philadelphia mission, I made sure this was the time the new family search just come out and I was working on it. There weren't too many names indexed, but we were all working on indexing the names, and I found some descendants from the Price family for her to do in the temple so that she would have that connection to the place that one of her great 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 grandfathers came from and was converted to the church. Just one last thing about George Washington Price is that since he was a master carpenter, he worked on the interior of the original Nauvoo temple. And he was working on it at the time real close when the saints were, the prophet was martyred and the saints were kicked out of Nauvoo. And his fiancee died a month before they were supposed to be married. And his history has it that he was so upset and so mournful that he never returned to the temple to pick up his tools again, but just left with the saints. Then he brought his heritage, his skill to Temple Square. In the assembly hall on Temple Square, that's across from the temple, or kitty corner to the temple, is where my stake in Salt Lake had its stake conferences every 6 months. And I remember sitting, got a beautiful interior, beautiful stained glass windows, a smaller version of the tabernacle in a sense, but there's a small little spiral staircase on the right hand side. My father would always tell me that his great grandfather built that staircase because he was a master carpenter, and also that he built the did a lot of the carpentry in the Salt Lake Temple, which is being renovated right now. This connected me well with him and with my ancestry since I grew up in Salt Lake and lived a mile from Temple Square, was often there. I received my endowments as well as my husband, and we were sealed in this temple. Our son was sealed in this temple to his wife. Many family members were married and sealed in this temple and received their endowments in this temple. And of course, I had my stake conferences in the building that he also worked upon and his labor and sacrifices upon. So this week, I want you to think of your family connections. Even if you come from a broken family, think about people that have become like family to you, your spiritual family, and the work and heritage that our spirit world family has. And I pray that you find sweet connections with those that are in your life, with friends, family, ancestors. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.